Next up, we have Zoroark. This Pokemon is based on the Kitsune of Japanese folklore, and its pre-evolution, Zorua, were the first Generation 5 Pokemon revealed to the public. They were also the stars of the 13th movie, in which Zoroark memorably used its signature illusion to impersonate Suicune, Entei, and Raikou. Today, we'll see if Zoroark was able to pull the wool over people's eyes in the competitive scene. Or, maybe we won't. Maybe none of this is real, and it's been tricking us all this time, and life as we know it is an illusion. Zoroark's illusion. However, since we have no way of knowing, for now, we'll just go ahead and ask, how good was Zoroark actually? And in this video, we'll be going over these competitive formats. During the time just before Pokemon Black and White were going to be released, the hype around Zoroark was absolutely outrageous, and for good reason. Being able to pretend it was another Pokemon was simply ridiculous. How on earth was one supposed to handle that? Like, imagine you're trying to counter Garchomp, but oh wait, it's actually Heatran, and there goes your Skarmory. Like that kind of thing. There was panic everywhere, especially when seeing Zoroark's solid attack, special attack, and speed. Not to mention that it also got Nasty Plot and Swords Dance. But then the hype subsided rather quickly. Everyone's expectations that Zoroark would completely change the way the game was played was true, but the reason why the hype died down was because alongside Zoroark came Team Preview, thus removing the tradition of a dedicated lead and playing blind, which is the way competitive was played since Gen 1. This was of course drastic, but Zoroark itself wasn't mediocre because Team Preview gave it away. Well, sure, that's fair, otherwise it'd be chaos, but surely it was still a top threat because it could completely fake the opponent out in battle, right? For example, switching Reuniclus in to check what looks like a Terrakion only to get completely crushed by Dark Pulse? Well, in theory, yes, but this didn't work out at all in practice. First of all, Zoroark could only pretend to be the last Pokemon in its trainer's party, meaning that not only could it not imitate anything, it could only imitate one specific Pokemon, which cut down on its unpredictability a lot. Second, Zoroark's bluff could be revealed by passive damage. It was hit neutrally by Stealth Rock, hit by Sandstorm, affected by Toxic Spikes, and so on. So if something like Garchomp switched in and for some reason took neutral Stealth Rock damage as well as Sandstorm, the jig was up. Its illusion would also fade if it was hit by an attack. Not that it would matter much given its frailty. The list of Pokemon in OU sharing all the aforementioned qualities was pretty small. It was basically just Tyranitar and Politoed, both of which weren't immense offensive threats that Zoroark could take advantage of bluffing, and so it needed to hope it got lucky. Speaking of switching in, it was incredibly difficult to do so given Zoroark's immense frailty and lack of useful resist. It couldn't circumvent these issues by leading off because at its core, Zoroark was just not that good. It wasn't that strong, and something as simple and common as a Rotom Wash lead would ruin it. There were simply too many things that had to go right for Zoroark to work at all, so it was never anything close to an OU staple. However, while it wasn't a top threat in UU, it did have its niche. Its issues remained, though some of them, namely residual damage, were less prominent due to the lack of permanent Sandstorm and the greater amount of top tier Pokemon neutral to Stealth Rock, such as Azelf, Kingdra, and Mew. It was still gimmicky, but it was at least usable. It had quite good speed for the tier, and its choice spec set was dangerous since it had nice immediate power and could easily trick against stall. Zoroark specialized in pretending to be Heracross, who took the same Stealth Rock damage, and whose regular checks Cofagrigus and Gligar could be crushed and crippled with Night Daze and Trick, respectively. But it wasn't used too much, since it wasn't a consistent strategy, and his ability to switch in was basically null. But even though it was a far cry from the generation-defining Pokemon it was expected to be at the beginning of the generation, it never fell to RU. So at least there's that. You're gonna have just as hard a time fooling an opponent with Zoroark's tricks, illusions, in VGC as in singles. While the Bring 6, Pick 4 format of VGC makes for a metagame in which the threat of Zoroark can be present without it ever coming to the battle, a frail dark type that has its plans ruined when it's hit by one move isn't exactly the ideal description of a doubles powerhouse. What's more, the prevalence of Protect means Zoroark could frequently give itself away without even getting anything done. When Zoroark was used successfully, it wasn't to bluff just one Pokemon, it was to bluff a whole play style. 2011's premier Zoroark user was Canadian mainstay Randy R. Inanimate Qua, who ran Zoroark alongside Chandelure, Gigalith, Electros, Jellicent, and Conkeldurr. To understand the strength of Zoroark, you need to look at the 2011 metagame as a whole, which was extremely limited. While there were rogue picks like Zoroark or Wolfglix and Boar, there was a stable roster of about 10 Pokemon that dominated the metagame. Of these Pokemon, Pokemon, quite a few were weak to dark or fighting moves. Both offensive threats like Crocodile, Scrafty, Terrakion, Hydreigon, and the common Trick Room setters of Jellicent and Chandelure didn't appreciate having a Focus Blast or a Dark Pulse sent their way. So Zoroark's coverage was good, fine, but so was something like Scrafty, a literal fighting and dark type, right? Here's the thing though, Zoroark wasn't just taking advantage of the fact that these limited Pokemon were weak to it, it was also taking advantage of the simple fact that the format was limited. With so few Pokemon showing up, it was easy for most players to suss out opponents' strategies from the newly added team preview. Take a look at Randy's team again. On paper, that's a very obvious Trick Room team, right? You got your Chandelure and Jellicent to set up, plus the trio of Gigalith, Conkeldurr, and Electros to knock him down. But in fact, not a single Pokemon on Randy's team had Trick Room. He was hard bluffing it, making for a nasty surprise for opponents who expected a Trick Room setup, only to face down a full offensive mixed Zoroark. Randy's Zoroark carried a sash alongside 252 attack EVs and 196 special attack EVs, letting it hit on both sides of the spectrum and get work done. What's more, it required the opponent to make a read to hit it with Fake Out, since it was disguised as a ghost type. In fact, at last year's North American International Championships, veteran player and commentator Dewey Ha recounted how he fell prey to just that 8 years earlier. With this team, Randy was able to place top 16 at the US Nationals, only losing to eventual champion Wolf Glick. He also used the team in the autumn-friendly Wi-Fi tourney, the first ever official Wi-Fi tournament, where he reached about 36th place in the world. Usually in a Wi-Fi tournament, you see a Zoroark and think it's a kid showing off their new favorite anthropomorphic fox, usually alongside Lucario, so a free win, right? Imagine their surprise when Randy took it to the top. Of course, such a strategy is pretty easy to counter if you see it coming, meaning Zoroark was a one-time affair for Randy, and outside of the limited 2011 metagame, it saw virtually no other high-level play in Gen 5, outclassed and outgunned as it was when the format started to open up. Zoroark's fundamental issues didn't change in Gen 6, and in fact it got worse with all the fairy types running around. It tumbled past UU and found itself in RU, though it enjoyed its first glimpse of competitive success by being too strong for the tier and getting booted out so that it could once more languish nigh unused in UU. Ah well, it did at least have a significantly buffed knockoff to abuse, and it enjoyed Dark no longer being resisted by Steel. These two factors alongside a vicious stat priority move in Sucker Punch meant it could run a pretty mean Source Dance set. Its premier set was still choice specs though, as it would cripple Stall hard and could potentially surprise a fairy like Florges with a powerful Sludge Bomb. When all was said and done, it was sadly entirely forgettable. Nobody considered it at all, both in using and preparing against, because of its core issues, which of course are given away in team preview, tough to get in safely, and inability to consistently leave much of a mark on the battle. Zoroark didn't even have a go-to Pokemon to impersonate like Heracross this time, like in the previous generation. It just wasn't thought of enough. It's sad that such a cool Pokemon was so completely passed over, but c'est la vie. Zoroark emerged from the shadows briefly for 2 good placements in the 2014 metagame. Brian Ing brought Zoroark to a Penn State Premier Challenge on an otherwise standard Parish Trap team with Politoed, Mega Gengar, Liepard, Amoonguss, and Gothitelle, adding an element of mind games that led him to 2nd place. In Melbourne, Jeremy Kay was able to give Zoroark a regional top cut performance in what was Australia's biggest tournament to date on a team featuring Mega Mawile, Bisharp, Rotom Wash, Salamence, and Amoonguss. Zoroark is a curious Pokemon since it relies entirely on mind games, and if it were ever to become popular, it would likely lose a good deal of its surprise factor. So it's not a huge shock to see it show up so sparsely. After those 2 good performances, it vanished from sight again, lurking until its next chance to befuddle VGC players. Surely Gen 7's power creep would work in Zoroark's favor, right? It makes sense that with everything getting stronger, the power level would be such that Zoroark would settle into RU and finally have a legitimate niche in the tier. Unfortunately, the Pokegods had other plans and Zoroark proved to be too overwhelming for RU again. Turns out the power creep worked against it. Z-Crystals meant its hits were far too difficult for the tier to safely stomach, especially given its unpredictability factor. Zoroark's lack of power had always held it back from fully abusing Illusion before, but with Black Hole Eclipse, that was no longer a problem, and RU wouldn't stand for it, so they sent it to RU-BL. But surely with Zoroark's newfound Z power, it finds some slight niche in UU and not toil in obscurity once more, right? Sadly, it wasn't meant to be. Zoroark was so outclassed that nobody kidded themselves about it having any semblance of viability at all. The tier was rife with stronger, better all-around dark types, most notably the tier-defining Hydreigon and the excellent Mega Houndoom. Zoroark's usually solid speed tier also failed it, crucially falling beneath the Cobalion, Terrakion, and Infernape range of 346, leaving it open to get pummeled by their fighting moves. It's almost cruel at this point how unusable Zoroark is, but there's no other way to spin it. It just can't be used if one's foremost intention is to win. Zoroark's final appearance of note came just last year when Jawan Kim managed to finish 26th at the North American International Championships alongside the Trickster Fox. Jawan, known as Sun Dude in the community, is an avid Lilligant user, featuring it on virtually every team he's ever used, especially last year, when Groudon's Desolate Land let Lilligant fire off fast and powerful Bloom Dooms. Unfortunately, Zoroark was unseen to the stream, like really unseen, not just as an illusion, but Jawan told us what role it served in his team. Just like Randy Quahl, Jawan usually used his Zoroark to try and build a big first turn advantage. Jawan's Zoroark was tailored to beat two of the strongest leads in the 2019 meta, Lunala and strong fake out users. First, Lunala. This one is pretty self-evident. Jawan would lead Tapu Lele and Necrozma Dustmane, in itself a quite strong pairing due to Tapu Lele's Psychic Terrain, boosting Ultra Necrozma's moves. This pairing, however, lost really hard to Lunala, whose Psychic/Ghost typing let it resist Psychic spam and take minimal damage thanks to Shadow Shield, before firing off with a Moongeist beam. However, what Lunala wasn't prepared for was Necrozma suddenly revealing a Stab Z Dark Pulse, which would completely annihilate it even through its defense boosting ability. Once Lunala is handled, Jawan's Psychic spam could truly get to work, with Groudon in the back for some extra firepower. While that specifically would handle Fake Out on its own due to Lele's Psychic Terrain, Jawan had another lead that would actually bait out Fake Out and turn the tables on the opponent. Most of Jawan's Zoroark set was fairly standard: Dark Pulse, Protect, and Snarl for utility, but its last move was one rarely seen in VGC, and perfectly suited to its crafty ways: Snatch. This other Zoroark specialty relies on Lilligant Groudon lead, once again an intimidating lead in its own right, due to Lilligant's threatening power under the sun. While Jawan's other lead negated Fake Out, this one actually invited it. The most common way opponents would deal with this was by using a strong Fake Out user, such as Mega Kangaskhan, to Fake Out Lilligant, while the paired Tailwind user, such as Lunala or Mega Salamence, would Tailwind to effectively nullify Lilligant. But Jawan would quite literally snatch that Tailwind out of the opponent's hands, stealing away their speed control and giving him suddenly a Tailwind boosted Groudon and Zoroark staring down the opponent, with Lilligant still ready to do work in the back. It's worth noting that these two disguises were the only ones Jawan would ever really attempt due to the abilities of his other Pokemon. If Groudon failed to bring Sun or Tapu Lele's Psychic Terrain fizzled out, the jig was up. And Jawan didn't bring Zoroark disguised as Stakataka, since its main role was just to check Xerneas. When all is said and done, however, both Randy and Jawan said that one of the biggest strengths of Zoroark was simply the ability to plant a seed of doubt in the opponent's mind. If you fool them once, they're likely to think they're playing four-dimensional chess the rest of the match, an overthinking that can lead to deadly mistakes. In this way, Zoroark is one of the most interesting Pokemon to ever see play in VGC. Its usefulness almost entirely relies on getting in your opponent's heads and making them see shadows where there aren't any. And that's it. So how good was Zoroark actually? Well, sadly, it wasn't at all. Ironically, even though it was completely terrible itself, it has indirectly shaped every single generation of Pokemon, starting with Black and White, as its mere existence requires the game to have team preview, lest there be utter chaos. So in that respect, Zoroark is one of the most definitive Pokemon of all time. However, on its own merits, it completely fails. Team preview turns on it and completely ruins what it's trying to do. And without illusion, it's an unimpressive Pokemon. Frustratingly, it hasn't even been able to find a lower tier to settle into yet, as whether it's dropped to RU, it's proved to be too much. Yet it never had an impact on UU. It didn't leave much of a mark on VGC either, although it did have a few nifty performances that showcased some excellent creativity, but still hardly a metagame staple. It's not released in Sword and Shield now, but barring some serious changes, there's unfortunately not much hope for Zoroark's future. Thanks for watching, everyone, and as always, if you liked the video and you want to see more, be sure to subscribe to False Swipe Gaming for more weekly Pokemon content. And in the comments, I want to know, what do you think about competitive Zoroark? Team preview is so common, but would you remove it just to make it good? I doubt it, but whatever it is, let me know in the comments. Also, thank you so much to our patrons for continued support of our videos, and thank you to everyone else watching as well. And follow my crew on these social media platforms. And that's all I got. See you next time, everyone.